Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going deep into the narcissist's mind to expose their most well-guarded secret, the UN-expected secret narcissists use to silence their inner critic. This inner voice is the source of their deepest shame, constantly threatening to shatter their grandiose façade. They can't eliminate the critic, so they employ a powerful, continuous technique, a monumental lie, to drown it out. Understanding this core psychological defense is key to seeing the vulnerability behind their arrogance. The narcissist's life is a constant, exhausting battle against their own inner critic. This voice constantly reminds them of their deepest flaws, their profound insecurity, and their paralyzing fear of being exposed as a fraud. This shame-based critic is so potent and overwhelming that the narcissist must develop an extreme defense mechanism just to function. Their survival depends on finding a way to mute this crippling internal sound, or else their entire identity would collapse into despair and self-hatred. The UN-expected secret they use to silence this tormenting inner critic is the relentless, pervasive construction of an external reality where they are perpetually superior and blameless. This is the monumental lie they not only tell the world, but more importantly, force themselves to believe at all costs. They must manufacture a life where they are always the victim, always the hero, and always the most competent person in the room, making it impossible for their internal critic to find any objective, external evidence to support its claims of inadequacy. The mechanism involves constant external validation, or what we call narcissistic supply. Every compliment, every promotion, every successful manipulation, and every tear you shed is collected as evidence to refute the inner critic. They require this external proof of their perfection because they have no internal self-worth to rely on. The supply acts as a psychological muzzle, momentarily silencing the critic with the loud, undeniable applause of others, confirming that their perceived grandiosity is real. When the inner critic speaks, it points out a genuine flaw, perhaps a mistake made at work, or a moment of cruelty in a relationship. The narcissist cannot tolerate this truth, so they immediately deploy the lie. Projection. They accuse you, the boss, or the system of the very flaw the critic is pointing out in them. By externalizing the problem, they successfully silence the critic, which is temporarily placated by the perceived purity and blamelessness of the narcissist's external self. This desperate need to silence the inner voice is what drives the narcissist's compulsive lying. They lie to cover up mistakes, to exaggerate achievements, and to invent narratives where they are always the protagonist. These lies are not just for you, they are crucial components of the grand external façade that serves as a protective layer against the shame-based attacks of their internal judge. The truth would give their critic ammunition, and that is a risk they cannot afford to take. Their inability to tolerate even the smallest piece of constructive criticism is directly linked to this defense mechanism. A slight critique from a friend or colleague is perceived as the inner critic gaining an external voice, a terrifying moment where their worst fears are validated by the outside world. They lash out with rage or denial to instantly destroy the external voice, thus protecting the lie and forcing the inner critic back into silence. The inner critic is relentless, and therefore, the narcissist's performance must also be relentless. They can never truly relax, because the moment the mask slips or the external flow of supply stops, the critic rushes back in with full force. This constant, exhausting need to be on and to manage perception is the hidden toll of their defense strategy, confirming that their life is a continuous, desperate war against their own minds. Their reliance on this lie means they are fundamentally incapable of genuine self-reflection or remorse. To acknowledge a mistake would be to validate the inner critic's claim, shattering the façade of perfection and unleashing the full force of toxic shame. They choose instead to double down on the lie, living in a rigid, false reality where their actions are always justified and their intentions are always pure. The most effective way they silence the critic is through triangulation and smear campaigns. By creating chaos and making you the target of their dysfunction, they successfully divert the inner critic's attention. The critic is momentarily distracted by the drama, silenced by the external narrative that pins all the blame and toxicity squarely onto you, preserving the narcissist's self-perception as the victim or the hero. The core of the lie is the belief that external validation equals internal worth. They substitute genuine, internal self-acceptance with the transactional thrill of supply. The inner critic says, "You are worthless," and the narcissist frantically seeks applause to shout, "No, I'm not. Look at all the people who love, envy, need me." A strategy that is ultimately unsustainable and always temporary. This psychological process is why the narcissist is perpetually restless and dissatisfied. Since the inner critic is never truly defeated, only silenced, the narcissist must constantly chase new supply, new achievements, and new relationships to maintain the lie. They are running a marathon against themselves, knowing that the moment they stop, the crushing truth of their inadequacy will catch up to them. The critic's voice is so terrifying that the narcissist develops a profound fear of intimacy and vulnerability. True intimacy requires letting the mask down and allowing another person to see their authentic, imperfect self. But that imperfect self is what the inner critic uses as its evidence, so they sabotage intimacy to protect the lie of their perfection from being validated by a close observer. The narcissist unconsciously uses future faking as a tool to silence the critic. By creating a perfect, idealized future that doesn't yet exist, the inner critic can't critique a perfect future, so it is momentarily quieted by the fantasy. These grand promises are simply psychological placeholders designed to buy the narcissist time and keep their internal shame-based attacks at bay. Their relentless pursuit of status, wealth, and beauty is entirely dedicated to supporting this lie. These external markers are visual proof of their superiority, overwhelming the inner critic with material evidence that says, "Look how successful and enviable I am. You must be wrong." They substitute genuine personal growth with expensive props and curated appearances. When the inner critic is particularly loud, the narcissist may resort to self-destructive behaviors like substance abuse or reckless risks. This is a form of emotional self-medication designed to temporarily numb the pain of the critic's attacks, proving that their external performance of strength is masking profound internal suffering and a desperate need to escape their own mind. The core tragedy of the narcissist is that they mistake their defense mechanism for their true self. The powerful, arrogant façade they built to silence the critic becomes their identity, trapping them in a lie where they can never find genuine peace or acceptance because they are constantly fighting a war against their own authentic emotions. This constant battle against the internal judge is what causes their notorious mood swings and volatility. A small trigger, a moment of failure or a feeling of being overlooked, is enough to momentarily break the lie, allowing the inner critic to surge forward. The external rage you witness is the immediate, desperate attempt to reseal the lie and silence the judge once more. The secret, therefore, is not a strategy for healing, but a strategy for emotional avoidance. They avoid the necessary pain of confronting their shame by constantly running towards external validation and away from internal truth. This refusal to engage in introspection ensures they remain perpetually immature and stuck in their destructive patterns. The one thing that instantly breaks their lie and unleashes the full force of the inner critic is your quiet, peaceful detachment. Your lack of reaction provides zero supply to refute the critic, leaving the narcissist alone with their own voice for the first time in ages. Your indifference is the psychological equivalent of pulling the plug on their elaborate life support system. Their inner critic forces the narcissist to have a profound fear of their own memory. They must rewrite their history, constantly forgetting or reframing past mistakes and cruelties to protect the lie of their perfection. They cannot afford to remember the truth, as it would instantly hand their internal judge a weapon to use against them. The way to protect yourself from this mechanism is to recognize that their actions, the abuse, the lies, the grandiosity, are never about you. They are desperate, external gestures aimed at satisfying an internal psychological demand. Their manipulation is a tool they use to keep their inner critic quiet, and you are simply collateral damage in their internal war. The narcissist's need to constantly be the most intelligent or capable person is the inner critic screaming, "You are a fool." They must prove their intellectual superiority to mute this voice, driving them into constant competitive situations where they risk sabotaging relationships just to win a petty argument and secure a temporary sense of intellectual invincibility. The secret lie of "I am a perfect victim" is highly effective at silencing the critic. By constantly framing themselves as the target of others' jealousy or cruelty, they redirect the inner judge's focus outward. The critic is silenced because how can one judge a victim who is suffering unfairly at the hands of others? The profound level of entitlement they display is a psychological defense against the critic's claim that you deserve nothing. They demand the best, they insist on special treatment, and they refuse to wait, all to provide external proof that they are indeed special and worthy of superior treatment, directly contradicting their internal sense of unworthiness. This constant performance to appease the inner judge is why the narcissist is so profoundly lonely. They can't let anyone past the façade, so they are trapped in a self-imposed prison of isolation. They crave true connection, but the risk of exposing the flawed, authentic self to the outside world is a risk their inner critic forbids them from taking. The key to maintaining their lie is to control the external narrative. They are masterful storytellers, constantly editing the past and future to ensure they are always portrayed in the most flattering light. This narrative control is necessary to prevent the inner critic from having access to any verifiable evidence of their imperfection. When the inner critic is winning, the narcissist experiences what looks like a crash or depression. This isn't true depressive illness. It's the temporary agonizing defeat of the false self, where the toxic shame and self-hatred of the inner critic are finally breaking through, causing them immense, unbearable psychological pain. Their sudden, reckless pursuit of a new supply source is often an emergency measure to silence a loud critic. They need a new, fresh audience that hasn't seen the mask slip, a new person to idealize them, and provide the overwhelming wave of validation needed to push the internal judge back into the shadows. The secret lie is sustained by the narcissist's inability to mourn or process loss. They cannot grieve relationships, jobs, or opportunities, because grieving requires acknowledging fault and imperfection, which would instantly empower the inner critic. They discard and move on immediately to keep the critic in check. Their constant need for attention and recognition is the inner critic's desperate need for external reassurance. They need to be noticed, acknowledged, and adored, because that attention is the lifeblood of the lie, the psychological resource that keeps the shame-based judge from taking over their internal world. The mechanism of silencing the critic is why the narcissist has a fixed, rigid personality. They cannot change or adapt their core beliefs, because any change suggests their previous actions were flawed, which would validate the inner critic's core premise. They must remain frozen in their false perfection. The devastating effect of this lie is that it ensures the narcissist never genuinely connects with their authentic feelings. They use the lie as a barrier against all uncomfortable emotions, fear, sadness, guilt, because those feelings are the raw material the inner critic uses to generate self-hatred. Their inner critic is effectively the voice of their childhood trauma, the critical, shaming voice of a caregiver that the narcissist internalized decades ago. They are simply reenacting that trauma by externalizing the blame onto others, rather than healing the original wound. Your greatest power in your healing journey is to understand that the narcissist is their own worst enemy. They are constantly tormented by a voice you can't hear, and their entire destructive apparatus is designed to stop that internal war, not to deliberately hurt you. The moment a narcissist is exposed or humiliated publicly, the agony you witness is the inner critic's deafening victory lap. This external validation of their flaws is the most terrifying thing they can experience, leading to explosive rage or a complete psychological collapse. The secret lie is that I am the one who is special. This conviction is so strong that any evidence suggesting otherwise is instantly rejected, violently if necessary, because their psychological survival depends on maintaining that rigid, unwavering sense of personal exceptionalism. Their inability to commit to anything stable is a form of sabotage against the critic. If a relationship or job became too comfortable and long-term, they'd run the risk of becoming too predictable, potentially exposing a flaw. They prefer the safety of constant, self-inflicted disruption. The toxic defense they use is essentially an emotional bypass. They bypass the necessary pain of confrontation and shame by instantly manufacturing a reality where they are flawless, thereby avoiding the vulnerability required for true emotional growth and maturity. The narcissist's constant need to win and be right is the inner critic demanding external proof of their competency. They would rather destroy a relationship or a friendship than concede a small point, because losing the argument means validating the critic's claim of inadequacy. This powerful defense mechanism explains why you can never win an argument with a narcissist. You are not arguing with the person. You are arguing with a life-or-death defense system designed to protect their fragile ego from the terrifying voice of their own mind. The way to counter this secret lie is to prioritize your own truth. Your reality, free of their manipulation and lies, becomes the undeniable evidence that their external fabrication is false, robbing their inner critic defense of its power. The inner critic is the source of the narcissist's chronic anxiety. They are perpetually on edge, waiting for the critic to strike or for the façade to be breached. This anxiety is the hidden price they pay for maintaining the monumental lie of their perfection. Their emotional coldness is a necessary shield. Empathy would require them to connect with the authentic pain of others, which would then open them up to their own authentic pain, instantly empowering the inner critic. Coldness is a form of self-preservation. The secret lie ensures they remain perpetually stuck in the past. They cannot genuinely move on, because moving on requires confronting the mistakes they made, which would instantly validate their inner critic. They are slaves to their own rigid, unchangeable history. Your peace and self-acceptance is the only thing that truly disarms their entire psychological defense. When you accept yourself, flaws and all, you demonstrate the freedom that they are eternally incapable of achieving, leaving them trapped in their own manufactured war. The brutal irony is that the inner critic speaks the truth. The narcissist is fundamentally insecure and flawed, but their pathological fear of this truth forces them into the lie that destroys every relationship they touch. Use this knowledge to maintain unwavering no contact. Do not provide them with any supply or attention, as that is the sustenance they need to keep their monumental lie and their entire façade alive and functioning. This complex defense mechanism confirms that the narcissist is living a life of profound, intense internal suffering. While you are healing externally, they remain wounded internally, constantly battling the dark truth of their own soul. If this discussion has given you clarity on the why behind the narcissist's behavior, recognize that understanding this secret lie is the final step in reclaiming your emotional freedom. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive. Your strength in seeking this truth is truly inspiring. If you found this information valuable and empowering, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. I look forward to connecting with you again soon.